Have you ever had the experience of reacting to something and then after reflecting on it, realizing that the reaction may have been a bit disproportionate to the event? The example that I like to give is someone who stubs their toe on a coffee table and they find themselves getting really angry at the coffee table. And then they find themselves getting angry at the fact that they didn't notice the coffee table. And then often what this flare-up starts to do is it starts to bring in the people in their life that are upsetting them, that all of a sudden there's a lot of people to blame about the fact that you stubbed your toe because you weren't able to pay attention. And the reason you couldn't pay attention is because you have too many things going on. And the reason you have so many things going on and you can't really handle it and you're overwhelmed is because of the connections you have in your life, the people in your life and the role they're playing or not playing in your life. What I have found in my years of experience is that these flare-ups, often when there's a very dramatic reaction to something that doesn't necessarily necessitate a dramatic reaction, is that they are attachment related. And we think that it's only about the people in our life right now and what they're doing or not doing with us. But generally speaking, those roots are a little bit deeper. And the roots are often what we could call attachment wounds. And these wounds are, in a sense, experiences we had with caregivers where we did not feel like they were attuning completely to our needs. And these are not necessarily intentional things, but we may have felt like we were unable to get comforted or nurtured or soothed or empathized with in some way during times where we felt very overwhelmed. Whether that's because the caregiver was not capable of doing that, they weren't capable of soothing or empathizing or attuning because of their own issues and challenges, or even sometimes where we actually took on the role of being very concerned with their state and how they were doing. So we almost acted somewhat as a caregiver, whether emotionally or in other ways, to our caregiver. These are things that have a very deep impact on our nervous system, because when our nervous system is in distress, especially when we're little, we do not have the ability to be able to know how to completely regulate ourselves. We need someone else to be able to do that with us. So what happens is if we have these attachment injuries and these experiences, those can become algorithms that we then translate and bring into some of our adult relationships. And how that can look is sometimes where we become extremely self-reliant, sometimes we become too reliant on other people. We create these dynamics where we get these big flare-ups that are a little bit overly dramatic, and that's partly because of how distressing it was when we were little, and that distress is still kind of within us until we bring some awareness to it. So what I want to talk about in today's video is just a framework of different behaviors that can happen in response to these types of attachment wounds. And the reason why it's important for us to think about this range of different expressions and manifestations is that they all have a little bit to do with some ability to either really upregulate and enhance our emotions and expressions or suppress and inhibit and downregulate. And all of that, the ability to do all of those things and adjust them in many different ways is important for our resilience and being very healthy and adjusted. If we stay in a very narrow range, it means we have less of a repertoire. And we may not be as context sensitive with our responses, which means that we might be expending way too much energy for something that doesn't actually need that much energy. For example, getting very upset about something when it's very dramatic, that's too much energy generally, oftentimes, for that type of situation. But in other situations, we actually may want to enhance and upregulate our emotions and actually express because the situation does call for that, or we need to release some emotions, but instead we've been suppressing. So I'm just going to show you this range of behaviors. It's a framework that I've created. I call it the Csuite. So in this upper range are kind of our healthier options. And so this is things like being able to create new opportunities, new frameworks, new models, even in the context of a challenge. Communicating is our ability to express what's inward outward using our vocalization, our vocal muscles, our fingers, our digits, our facial expressions in ways that are still able to receive. So it's not always lovey-dovey kind of communication. It can be anger, but it's still communicated in a way that's received by another person. Comfort is our ability to use our hands, our bodies, our voices, our breath, our facial gestures to actually try and co-regulate with somebody. Then in this realm, this is kind of the confrontation realm. And so this is in a sense we're starting to use a little bit more of the sympathetic nervous system. And so in one of these, it's coerce, which means that we are actually amplifying our emotional expressions and getting them to be maybe even more dramatic in order to get a response from somebody else. So we may even use things like listening to angry music, talking to people we know hate that other person, going through the negative memories in order to actually activate some of this system that gets us to, get more energy going, to have distress about it. And then in this realm, there's also claw, and these can all be kind of connected. Claw is an actual wanting to injure in a sense. So this could be attack and an insult, and also verbal types of aggressions. Climb is anything we do to get away. So it's using our body, using our limbs, mobilization to get away from the situation. So that can be, distracting ourselves, other events, other people, things like that. And then in this realm is more of a suppressed kind of realm. So one of them is camouflage. And this is where we are in a sense suppressing our own identity. We want to match the other person. We become kind of amorphous. We have the same preferences as them, same opinions. We don't stand for anything. Cower is another form. These are in a sense a submissive kind of area. Cower is a form of submission. So that comes from any kind of dynamic where there's a dominant person and then the other person is submitting. They're cowering. And collapse is like a dissociation, a disconnect, a complete suppression of energy. So all of these are not necessarily negative things. They can all be used in moderation and we can adjust for different things. The question is, if you tend to default in one of them more often than not, then one thing you might want to think about is, for example, if you often communicate and express, then maybe something to think about is whether you can actually take some time to zone out for a little bit and go quieter. If you're often in the confrontation zone, you might want to play with coming up here and seeing what you could create with that energy, or even dialing it down a little bit and going into some zone out. The main point being that, and actually just give you one more, is if you're often in the confrontation zone, then even something like camouflage doesn't have to be a negative thing. It actually can look like something like compromise, where you're starting to see where you could meet with somebody in the middle. So all of these are again, not negative or positive, but just something to think about for you is whether your reactions may be a little bit too amplified for the moment, in which case there may be some kind of attachment related stuff going on, and you may have some of these behaviors that you default to. So in order to create a larger repertoire range, see if there are moments where instead of upregulating, you downregulate, for example. Instead of express, maybe you actually take some time for yourself, things like that. So I will continue to go more into this in an upcoming video as well. And go to my website if you want to sign up for my emails, where I send different articles about stuff like this too. So that's stephaniefay.com. Thank you.